Well, hello people, and welcome back to some more Cities Skylines 2 coverage. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's time for the 9th Dev Diary, this time focusing on the economy and production. And this is one of the aspects of the games that's changing probably the most, I would say. So, let's have a look at the diary, and then we'll go over the blog together, shall we?
They say money makes the world go round. It's as true in Cities Skylines 2 as it is in our world. Keep your city spinning by steering its economy on a course to prosperity. Your city's economic simulation is modeled on real-world economics. This introduces complexity and nuance to city building without making it complicated. The economic system in Cities Skylines 2 is actually engineered to help you grow your new city, and as it develops, to give you influence over the financial levers that generate wealth. You'll raise revenue by taxing the sale of.
So look at this screen right here. So for the first time, we're getting a good look at the taxation tab of the new economy panel. And we can see that each of the 3 types of zoning that we're all very familiar with, residential, commercial, and industry, now have a drop-down menu that further expands all these different things that you can tax. And they go on to explain later on in the video how this will affect the sort of supply and demand. If you tax it less, it's going to produce more. But how crazy is this, right? This is almost like the farthest frontier in a way, where you're sort of collecting sand to smelt into glass, and then that glass gets sent to your preservist where it's used to store food, and then that gets sent to the food storage. All these different resources and how it's broken down is very in-depth and not something I really expected from the sequel at all. We can see here, we break down industrial, we can see convenience food, so even like foods are broken down between like TV dinners and actual fresh food. It's pretty crazy. Furniture, grain, paper, timber, veg, vehicles and electronics. And it scrolls down as well, there's a lot here, really cool.
Goods and services, energy production, the extraction of raw materials, tourism, and more. You'll also tax private incomes, as healthy economic activity will mean jobs for citizens. With money in your city's coffers, you can invest in city services and infrastructure, schools and universities, and all the other engines of urban development.
So hopefully by them saying that, it's kind of like the economy in Cities 1 was a joke. I'm not really looking for an economy simulator, so to speak. But once you get past those initial milestones in Cities Skylines 1, money essentially becomes meaningless because it's so easy to print it, it's so easy to cheese it, especially with part life cheeses and road tolls, stuff like that. So hopefully this is going to make our builds a lot more impactful because we're having to produce proper industry and proper goods that are distributed across the city. It's not just a case of, oh, I need a bit more money, let's do some part life cheesing. Now, I'm a strong believer in, I think that city simulation and city builders are 2 separate genres of game, and this definitely leans more into the city simulation side of things. Kind of similar to City State, if anyone's ever played that before, how you kind of simulate the economy. So Cities 2 seems to be getting a lot more in depth with that, doesn't it?
An important aspect of economic growth is balancing supply and demand.
Little industrial shot here as well, some animated industry, some hoppers dropping what looks to be, I don't know, gold maybe. It's pretty gold and good. But nice to see some little animations happening within the buildings there as well.
Businesses will do this automatically, exporting their goods when they produce more than the market wants. However, this can hit their bottom line as transport costs can reduce profitability. To keep the rate of production in line with demand, businesses will even fire employees.
So that's interesting that workplaces are going to fire Sims as production demands rise and fall. Hopefully that means that the unemployed demographic is now a lot more impactful in the city. Of course, we've also seen homelessness confirmed as a mechanic too in previous dev diaries. So it seems a lot more interconnected with the simulation, doesn't it, across the actual production chain to the Sims themselves. Again, it all sounds very cool in theory, but how well is this going to function in practice?
On the flip side, when products aren't made fast enough to meet local demand, companies in your city will be forced to buy from expensive outside connections, and that can quickly eat into profits too.
So here we get a good look at some of the outside connections, so we can see top imports for New Dollarton, convenience food, beverages making up the most at 16.9% and 20%. So I guess based on New Dollarton's imports, it really doesn't have that much industry, does it? Where it seems to have quite a lot of office because it's producing a lot of financial, telecom, media and software exports, but a lot of food and other things aren't being produced locally, which is cool. But again, you can just see a breakdown of all the resources, petrochemicals even in there as well, textiles, again, chemicals different to petrochemicals, like plastics, paper. Didn't expect to see all these resources broken down.
Taxes can also influence the production rate of specific goods. You can slow the rate of production by raising taxes, lower taxes to accelerate production rates and lure similar manufacturers to your city. It's also possible to motivate businesses to specialize in ways that strengthen the economy. Imagine reducing taxes for furniture stores and the various industries that manufacture their products. That will make them more profitable.
So that's kind of what we talked about earlier, wasn't it? You can bring the tax rate down for various resources, and then you're going to see that reflected in the real world. For example, they're bringing down furniture and timber tax here, which as a result is going to increase the amount of businesses and industry that produce timber and sell furniture. So really interesting. Again, it's going to be interesting just to see how often we need to come in and do stuff like this. How achievable is this system going to be? Again, questions that can only be answered once we've really played the game.
More businesses specializing in the design and manufacture of furniture will crop up. Before you know it, your city will have a flourishing furniture.
So you see here that our city's going to have a flourishing furniture industry, and Anu's interior design is selling furniture, so you can click on each commercial unit and get a visual representation of what that is selling. Pretty cool.
Your trade and a reputation that keeps cash flowing in. Managing and adjusting production chains is another way you can influence your city's economy. Overhauled in City Skylines 2, this adds a whole new dimension to.
So we're seeing here, these are clearly oil wells or like an oil field. And we also see this little animated vehicle coming back in off the fields as well, which is really cool to see some actual animated industry vehicles. I think we're also going to be getting the same as well with kind of like farm fields and tractors moving around, which is quite exciting.
The city building. There's no need to micromanage every detail if you don't want to.
So this is interesting, isn't it? So this is having a look at the production tab of the economy tab, basically. So we're hovering over materials and we're seeing that we can either get, well, we're looking at here as coal as an example. So we can either receive coal via import or we can mine it ourselves. That then gives us the raw resource of coal, and then coal can either be used to produce electricity, it can be processed into some sort of goods, I'm not sure what that little icon there is representing, or it can be exported. So nice clear representation of how each of the resources are handled in the production chain and what you can actually do with that. One of my biggest pet peeves about games that kind of work with this individual resource system is they don't lay it out quite clearly enough, but I'm happy with all the little menus here and how it's being visually represented. Very easy information to take in, isn't it? Because it can be quite overwhelming sometimes.
But if you love a puzzle, there's almost no limit to how deep you can go.
See here again, another example of concrete. Looks like you can get ore and then process that into concrete or import it yourself. And then that concrete is used for building upkeep, which is cool. So another little way of using a resource there, or again, it can be exported. So super cool. A really interesting mechanic that I didn't expect to be part of Cities 2. A much more involved economy and production system.
Starting from raw material extraction, you can get raw materials into the city by importing them or producing them locally. Opt for local production, and you'll need to establish.
There's fields again. No, we've had drawable fields confirmed now, but look how much of a more realistic farm that is. Actual large fields that fill an area with a farm building, like a farmhouse in the middle. Enormously happy with the farms, everyone.
Specialized industry area.
And for the first time, see some farm fences, please.
Farm fences, please. Please.
Has that been drawn in, or is that automatic? Some farm fencing confirmed, though.
There are 9 total. 4 are farms where you can raise livestock or grow either grain, vegetables, or cotton. Forests produce timber, though how much depends on the age of the forest. You can extract ore, stone, or coal from underground deposits. And lastly, you can drill for oil. You'll manage all this activity via the economy panel. It puts your city's finances at a glance and allows you to monitor and adjust production outputs for various goods and materials. With integrated tools.
So here we're getting a look at some of the new loan screens. So loans in cities weren't really that impactful. They were essentially just free real estate. You took the loan and you barely noticed the repayments going back out of your city's coffers. We've got different interest rates here as well. You can also have a slider for the loan amount, so not just 3 preset loan values anymore. You can actually have the slider, which I guess is going to increase the interest rate, monthly costs. So much more involved loan system this time around.
Tools and clear displays, the economy panel is a user-friendly way to manage and grow your economy. So, if money really does make the world turn, how will you grow your city's economy so everyone in it can enjoy the ride?
And I'm sure we all will enjoy the ride indeed. So much more involved economy and production system this time around, isn't there? Let's have a look at the dev blog now and see if there's any further information that we can pick out there as well. So let's have a little look here about how this new economy cycle is actually simulated and how the game is going to read it, and then obviously how we can interpret that information to make our cities more successful. So the economy is formed by flows of various resources among the agents, and these agents are households, businesses, and city services. The number of agents will naturally grow as the city grows, of course, and each agent tracks the amount of money and resources that they have. Agents have expenses and income. They try to rebalance them out by making decisions on what to buy and selling depending on their current situation. Households will spend money to buy resources and pay rent. Businesses buy resources, turn them into other resources which they can then sell to other businesses or customers. Businesses also pay rent for their building, which is taken into account when they calculate their profit. And certain city services also consume resources, and these expenses are added to their monthly upkeep. So it's pretty involved, it's pretty complicated. Then comes on to say that money doesn't just appear out of nowhere. So rent, import payments, company profit, and player income are money sinks that remove money from the economic simulation. And to balance those money sinks, the simulation will also read money sources, which comes from paid rents, company profits, and funds used by the player, which are distributed so that half of them go to citizens based on their education level, and the other half is evenly distributed to commercial buildings' wealth. And other money sources are export income from business and city services, tourists, and the aforementioned government subsidies for the city and individual citizens. So this is the first time we're seeing the government referenced in the game, isn't it? So the government automatically grants the city subsidies depending on its economic situation. A small city in an overall weak financial situation with poor tax revenue and low service fees receives a fair amount of subsidies, while a larger city in a good financial situation with high revenue stream only receives negligible to no subsidies. So that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if we see that government mechanic mentioned again, or whether or not that's expanded on further down the line. So we will get government subsidies, which is cool, I guess. Something new, at least. So it now comes on to mention how households are factored into this simulation. A lot of stuff here we already know about. Families preferring larger apartments. We discovered this in the housing dev diary, didn't we? But households also want to reside close enough to workplaces so their pathfinding costs are lower. Workplace pathfinding costs consider education levels of the available jobs and give a small bonus to jobs that match the employee's education level. Additionally, companies with fewer employees are preferred over companies with only a few open jobs, which ensures a somewhat even distribution of workers. The same applies to leisure options and shopping. Citizens want to spend more time enjoying their activities than travelling to them, which is fair enough. And households with children want to live near elementary schools, since all children go to school if the city has any. So households will go shopping when the AI detects a lack of resources. It then checks the household members and their product preferences and chooses a product based on the preference weight. Once the product type has been selected, it picks one of the household members who then travels to a shop, selling the desired product, and makes the purchase. Once the purchase has been made, product is then transmitted to the household's resources. So all of these decisions are made to maximize the household's happiness, and the suitability of the household's apartment is calculated by adding together the pathfinding costs to their various destinations, their free time left after work and travel, money they have left after expenses, and the services that match their current needs. So there's a lot of different values all fighting for the AI's attention there, isn't there? So it all sounds really cool in theory, and I'm sure Collosal Order are capable of putting this into practice, but I don't know, it seems a lot more complicated now, doesn't it, as to how the simulation is actually managed. So now we're coming into industry and how industrial zoning is factored into the production chain. So it goes on to say that they consider the value of production at the site as they choose where to found the company. The size of the property is relevant to the profit calculation, as larger industrial buildings have higher rent. The land value will also affect rent, so industrial companies prefer areas with low land value to maximise profits. So that's cool. We're kind of seeing low land value actually have a meaning now, because obviously in Cities 1, we tend to go for higher land value the better, and low land value as a general rule of thumb tends to be a bad thing, but nice to see now that low land value actually has a use in Cities 2. Then goes on to say that as a company's profit increases, they are able to invest more into the building upkeep alongside paying rent, which slowly increases the building's level and the surrounding land value. So the company level and efficiency also affect the production rate. This means that as the level and efficiency of the company increase, they can produce more with the same amount of expenses of water and electricity, thus lowering the price of the produced unit. So some of the industrial zone buildings are warehouses that don't produce anything by themselves but are still part of resource trading. So when resources are bought from outside connections, they are transported to warehouses where they are stored until they are needed. And as mentioned earlier, the price of the order consists of the transport costs and price of the resource, and companies can trade with both warehouses and outside connections. The warehouses attempt to stay well stocked and balanced by moving resources around the city, evenly distributed among the warehouses. In addition to zoned warehouses, many of the cargo transportation buildings function as warehouses as well. We saw that in practice with the shipping yard, like the container port is now a warehouse as well, which makes total sense. As these warehouses have special connections to the outside world, their transportation costs differ from usual truck traffic imports. Which is cool. It's nice to see warehouses make a return, but I'm a little surprised that they're zoned buildings and we can't place them. It's going to be interesting to see just what the ratio of regular producing industry is to warehouses spawning in. I hope that that's not going to be too imbalanced, but again, we're hoping this new simulation is going to be pretty perfect and flawless, so warehouses growing up to hold all these imports will hopefully not be an issue, since we can't manually place them ourselves anymore, of course, away from things like shipping containers which function as them as well. This is cool as well that unoccupied buildings have no signs to display until a company moves in. So even if there's no company there, it's not just going to turn into this grey abandoned husk like it does in Cities 1. You can see it says your ad here. And you've just got an industrial unit for let. It's going to be nice to see things like that knocking around the city, I think, isn't it? So now we'll come on to how commercial goods interact with this new economic simulation, which we saw briefly in the video, didn't we, about how and we saw this in the video briefly, didn't we, they're reducing the taxation on furniture and things used to make furniture like timber to increase the amount of furniture companies that are knocking around in the city. So commercial companies need products to sell, they need workers to service the customers and sell those products, and they want to be located close to residential areas which provide the bulk of the customers. Commercial companies order products from manufacturing companies in industrial areas as well from your outside connections. And similar to industrial companies, the commercial units will take transportation costs into account when they evaluate suitable locations in the city, as they eat into the profits that that company will generate. They will then try to bounce good connections to product manufacturers and customers, while also react to the demand for different products. So as an example, if a neighbourhood doesn't have a grocery store and the customers have high transportation costs, which is time and money from their pathfinding calculation to reach the closest grocery store, the simulation marks the neighbourhood's close surroundings as a lucrative area for grocery stores to appear. So that's really cool. So if a neighbourhood is lacking a grocery store, then the simulation is going to mark that as an area where a grocery store should be built. Again, pretty cool that it is that involved. Didn't expect it to be at all. So now coming on to office companies. So again, they will function very similar to how industrial manufacturing is factored into this economic simulation. And we saw this, didn't we, in New Dollarton's kind of import and export breakdown. $2 had obviously produced his city to the point it was making a lot of electronics and software, telecom and banking and media as his main exports, rather than going for that industrial production and manufacturing side of it. It's going to be interesting to see how all of us specialise our cities into what we actually produce. We're going to go for a very heavy industrialised economy, or are you going to be basically exporting social media and telecoms and banking services to become this kind of financial powerhouse? I guess all this economic simulation stuff is going to lead to a lot more diverse city establishment, I guess. Some of us are going to go much more industrial focused, where others a little bit more tech and media focused. It is cool. So it even goes on to say here that while good transportation connections are beneficial for offices, they're not reliant on short transportation distances since the resource they require is lightweight and cheap to transport. So even the weight of these goods is being factored into the simulation, which is, again, just crazy. It doesn't weigh in on their decision making while evaluating suitable locations for founding the companies. Thus, it is more important to be close to the residential areas where the potential workforces live in the case of office spaces at least. So now we'll come on to the production of said resources. So a lot of stuff here is pretty well known already. So to get raw materials into the city, you need to produce them locally with a specialised industry area or import them. Similar to Cities 1 there, isn't it? And stuff we already know from previous dev diaries. So to create an extraction area, we will need to use the specialized industry area tool, which is activated when you place the industry hub building. The tool works similarly to the district tool covered in city services, so it's that kind of click and drag polygonal line definition area, isn't it? Much better than the surface painter tool we had from Cities 1. And we also saw the gameplay of them placing those corner nodes, didn't we? And then that gives us this big ore mine here. So interesting to see how we've moved away from the industry's DLC format of painting out your area and then placing the buildings down themselves, like we did in today's build guide if you haven't seen the episode. But now it just goes on to say that define the extraction area and watch as buildings and vehicles get to work extracting the natural resource. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. That kind of removes industrial builds, doesn't it? Because we can't really build ore mines anymore. You just define the area and then it just goes and starts working. I really appreciate the new aesthetic of the ore mines. They look a little more realistic. Kind of got a big, dirty gravel area with these huge teeth excavators. But if I'm not placing this bucket tooth excavator myself, I'm not really building the industry area, am I? Which is a little concerning for me, I guess, that we've moved away from placing our own assets and now just marking an area, and then you watch as buildings and vehicles just do it. Not sure how I feel about that. So zoned industry requires resources that again can be imported from outside connections or produced locally with specialized industry. Using these resources, the industrial companies process them into material goods, which again can be sold to other manufacturing companies for further processing, or they can be exported again or sold to commercial companies. And additionally, the offices function as manufacturing companies, but instead of producing material goods, they will produce immaterial goods such as Wi-Fi, broadband, media, etc. And then at the end of the production chain, all of the produced resources and goods find their way to the end consumer, whether they are households in your city or an outside connection. So here we come on to some resource production factors, which is quite interesting. So we have price here. So the price will naturally refers to the actual price of a unit in the resource. The price determines how many units of the resource a household can buy when they restock their household resources. And the price of the resource is constant, but the availability of the resource contributes to the transportation costs, which define the end profit margins for the companies. Weight is also factored in as well. So light resources like pharmaceuticals incur a small transport cost, while stone and steel, of course, are super heavy and will incur higher transport costs. So that's really interesting there. Again, I mentioned I didn't expect weight to be factored into it at all, but they've clearly broken down all these resources now like we saw earlier in the video, so I guess it would make sense that they're factoring in stuff like weight. Space is also considered as well, so it affects the profitability of the resources. Some resources require more space for manufacturing than others, which would make sense. And companies that manufacture resources that take up large amounts of space prefer to be located in areas where land value is low, so the company can make the most profit. Again, so we're seeing low land value actually be useful now, it's not just always a negative thing. So we get an example here. So the factory's expenses are mostly dictated by the cost of acquiring its input, stone. As stone is ubiquitous but rather heavy, the transport costs are probably a large part of the cost, making the company more likely to locate near a stone quarry. Additionally, the factory is probably quite large, so we'll try to pick a location where the land price is not very high. Another large cost comes from paying the wages of the relatively untrained workers the factory will use. The factory also buys in water and electricity, prices of which are set by the player. Lastly, the factory also earns money by selling its product to either local electronics or chemical factories, or again to an outside connection. If it has to export, it will pay the transportation costs and be less profitable. Finally, the player will tax whatever profit is left. or may even subsidize the mineral production if he wants to have more of it produced in the city. So it's pretty involved, isn't it? It's a very complicated system, certainly going to take a long time to kind of wrap your head around it and really get familiar with it, because it's so different to Cities Skylines 1 kind of supply, production and demand chain. So now we're coming on to how our specialized industries are changing. So in Cities 1 it was very simple, it was 4 types, and Cities Skylines 2 is now 9. And you can choose between 4 types of farming. So livestock will require no natural resources, while grain, vegetable and cotton farming all need to be on fertile land. So really good to see livestock and farming properly broken down now. Forestry naturally requires forests. Stone mining can be utilised anywhere on the map, but if you want coal and ore, you need to be, of course, on a deposit. Then lastly, we have oil drilling, which can also extract oil from underground. So interesting to see how the specialised industries are changing. I'm really happy with this upgrade, especially with the whole farming side of it. We've seen the farms in the gameplay trailers before. Much more realistic looking fields. And nice to see that, livestock have been separated away from that as well. Really cool, happy with this. So this is quite interesting, this has definitely changed. So specialised industry does not affect the industry's own demand, and the economy of the companies in the specialised industry areas function differently, as they cannot go bankrupt. Instead, they downsize production and the number of employees when profits are down. This can especially happen if the area runs out of the natural resource. So does this mean to a point if it's going to run out of the natural resource, obviously if you're going to play with unlimited oil and ore on like we always do in Cities 1, that eventually you're just going to be left with barren oil fields, and at some point down the line you're going to have used all the natural resources, so your only option for a long-term city is to import oil once you've used up all your own. Again, totally true to real life of, ore and oil don't last forever in the ground, but these resources take a long amount of time to actually get out of the ground. It's something I always hated about Cities 1 was the fact that oil and ore depleted so quickly. So if that mechanic is going to return, I hope they've really adjusted the depletion rates, because you can have an oil derrick in Cities 1 and it does like 10 pumps and the oil is gone, and it just makes it so stupid and unrealistic. So I'm really hoping if they're going to run with that mechanic again, that it's properly balanced this time. Look how cute this is, a little tractor in the field, everyone. Yes, please. Farming simulator confirmed in Cities Skylines. So happy to see a little tractor moving about a field. What a massive improvement that is to just a visual farm aesthetic, right? Yes, please for that. So specialised industry vehicles are not part of the normal traffic and don't drive on roads, but they still travel on paths created by the simulation when industrial areas are created. The vehicles operate within these specialised industry areas only, and will gather resources. Once they gather enough, they drop the resource at the main building, which then processes the resources and then sends them out across that production and simulation chain that we've talked about today. So I've got a feeling we're all going to be looking at this economy panel quite a bit. And it's nice to get a sense of the values here of what New Dollarton is earning at least. So 10.2 million in taxes, 2.5 in city services, 216 grand in service trade, which is significantly less value than the other ones, isn't it? And 1.1 million in government subsidies at 112,000 population. He still gets that much. He does also have 30 million in the bank, so I guess it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. Whereas the expenses, you can see he's none from subsidies, but 14.1 million in service upkeeps and 30,000 lost to service trade with no loan interest. So from the budget tab, you can take a quick glance at city revenues and expenses. Loans work a bit differently than in Cities 1. So instead of taking one of 3 loans, there is now only 1 loan available, but the loan is adjustable and it can be paid back or increased at will. You can take a loan and determine its size by moving the slider, again, which we saw in the gameplay trailer, didn't we? It does go on to say here, that loans can be costly, but provide us it with money it needs here and now. So hoping that the loan system is a little more involved now than just free real estate like it was in Cities 1. And here we're getting a look again at that residential drop-down menu now, so you can specifically tax different education levels, which is really cool now. So you can create this, horrendous dystopia where the rich pay no tax and you can really tax the poor. You can really take it down. I guess that's going to really, the Sim's going to react to that. If you're taxing the arse off of your uneducated, whereas the highly educated are paying no tax at all. This is where you kind of stepping into the realm of like City State. Again, sorry to reference that game again, but you know, you kind of do something like this in City State, you're going to start seeing protests across your streets. This is why I think city simulation and city builders are two separate genres of game, and this is definitely leaning more into city simulation for me. Just let me know if that's a good or bad thing for you. Do you prefer this sort of management as opposed to tree, fence, and bush detailing with a bit of intersection marking tool? Or do you prefer this kind of slider simulation? Let me know in the comments below. So from the services tab, you can adjust different city service budgets which affect the service building's efficiency and in turn the quality of said services. For electricity, water and sewage, you can also change the service fee which affects the consumption of the service, but also company efficiency and the happiness of citizens. For example, lowering the service fee for electricity will increase electricity consumption, company's efficiency, and the happiness of the citizens. So with these tools, we can fine-tune the service output to match current demand. However, an important design aim of these is that they do not need to be constantly micromanaged, but for more experienced players, they provide an additional layer of complexity to the simulation. So kind of adjusting the sliders in Cities 2 was really just to help balance things out, but interesting now it's going to have a much greater effect on happiness. And in the production tab, you can observe each of the materials, material goods, and immaterial goods your city is producing. And from that, you can also observe whether your city's production of the resource is either in a surplus or in a deficit. You can highlight each resource to reveal additional information which shows you where the resource can be gained from and where it can be sold or used, which again we saw earlier, didn't we? We referenced this. So as an example, wood can be produced from forestry or it can be imported. Wood is used for heating and it can also be sold to processing companies, I guess, to be processed into things like furniture, or it can be sent to an outside connection. I'm really happy with this, because there's so much more numbers and data being thrown at us now in Cities 2, which can be quite overwhelming for quite a lot of people, but they're really breaking it down here. I'm liking how this visual representation of the production chain is being shown here. Nice and clear. It looks pretty cool. And with all this extra information, we will gain a deeper understanding of what your city is consuming and how much your already existing industry is producing, which will help us plan our city and transportation more efficiently, which in turn can help reduce traffic and provide more tax income. So I guess now, when we come to zone up industry, we're not just zoning that yellow squares anymore. We actually have to factor in the production chain. What's the land value like here? Is it going to be an industrial manufacturing company that prefers lower land value? So it gives us a little bit more to think about, doesn't it? Rather than just endlessly zoning to satisfy those demand bars down in the bottom left. The whole production and economy simulation now makes it much more impactful, I think. But that is going to wrap it up for the economy and production dev diary. A lot to unpack here, very complicated system to get to grips with, but I'm sure, of course, as we spend more time with it, things are going to get easier. Some really interesting things. I like how we've got so many more different resources now. It's very farthest frontier, or sort of, I guess, reminiscent of other city simulators where you're playing with different resources and products. It's nice to see something like that come into City Skylines. I'm a big fan of those sorts of mechanics in games. Other things I'm not so keen on is the fact that those specialized industry areas, they've really moved away from the industries DLC format in terms of painting them out and then plating the buildings yourself. It now looks like you just paint out the district and those buildings will just start spawning in and extracting it for you, which kind of removes the whole building mechanic from the game. Not a fan of that. I'm hoping maybe a second Industries DLC will come and change that at some point. And like I mentioned today, it's kind of split for me. I think I've mentioned, city sims and city builders could be two separate genres of game. I'm very much more a fan of the city builder type games. I enjoy the simulation to an extent, but it isn't the reason I play. So I'm really interested just to see how that's going to affect my experience of City Skylines 2 when we eventually get to play it. But there's a lot of cool stuff here. Let me know what you're thinking of this much more involved economy and production simulation. It's certainly a lot different to Cities 1. And I guess probably one of the things that's changed the most alongside probably the road tools. Yeah, a lot of changes here. So let me know what you're thinking of it. I'm still taking deep breaths from last week after finding out that it looks like autumn is not in the game, even though they're adding seasons, and The Sims 3 nailed this 10 years ago. But I'm not bitter about it. It's fine. I'm sure autumn will arrive in some capacity at some point. Otherwise, Let's keep that Cities 2 conversation going down below. Let me know what you're thinking of this. Anything here that's really, again, tickled the pickle or ground the gears if you're increasingly getting more pissed off with Cities 2 as the more you find out about it. Let me know what you think about it below. As always, I'll leave you with the trailer, but I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day.
They say money makes the world go round. It's as true in city skylines too as it is in our world. Keep your city spinning by steering its economy on a course to prosperity. Your city's economic simulation is modeled on real-world economics. This introduces complexity and nuance to city building without making it complicated. The economic system in City Skylines 2 is actually engineered to help you grow your new city, and as it develops, to give you influence over the financial levers that generate wealth. You'll raise revenue by taxing the sale of goods and services, energy production, the extraction of raw materials, tourism, and more. You'll also tax private incomes, as healthy economic activity will mean jobs for citizens. With money in your city's coffers, you can invest in city services and infrastructure, schools and universities, and all the other engines of urban development. An important aspect of economic growth is balancing supply and demand. Businesses will do this automatically, exporting their goods when they produce more than the market wants. However, this can hit their bottom line as transport costs can reduce profitability. To keep the rate of production in line with demand, businesses will even fire employees. On the flip side, when products aren't made fast enough to meet local demand, companies in your city will be forced to buy from expensive outside connections, and that can quickly eat into profits too. Taxes can also influence the production rate of specific goods. You can slow the rate of production by raising taxes, lower taxes to accelerate production rates and more similar manufacturers to your city. It's also possible to motivate businesses to specialize in ways that strengthen the economy. Imagine reducing taxes for furniture stores and the various industries that manufacture their products. That will make them more profitable. More businesses specializing in the design and manufacture of furniture will crop up. Before you know it, your city will have a flourishing furniture trade and a reputation that keeps cash flowing in. Managing and adjusting production chains is another way you can influence your city's economy. Overhauled in City Skylines 2, this adds a whole new dimension to city building. There's no need to micromanage every detail if you don't want to. But if you love a puzzle, there's almost no limit to how deep you can go. Starting from raw material extraction, you can get raw materials into the city by importing them or producing them locally. Opt for local production, and you'll need to establish a specialized industry area. There are 9 total. 4 are farms where you can raise livestock or grow either grain, vegetables, or cotton. Forests produce timber, though how much depends on the age of the forest. You can extract ore, stone, or coal from underground deposits. And lastly, you can drill for oil. You'll manage all this activity via the Economy panel. It puts your city's finances at a glance and allows you to monitor and adjust production outputs for various goods and materials. With integrated tools and clear displays, the Economy panel is a user-friendly way to manage and grow your economy. So, if money really does make the world turn, how will you grow your city's economy so everyone in it can enjoy the ride?